The weak version of you didn't die by accident. You killed him the moment you realized he was the one barrier standing between you and influence, respect, and power. Most people cling to their old identities because they want safety. You're choosing danger. You're choosing transformation. And transformation demands brutality, especially against yourself. The truth is simple. You cannot become feared, respected, or unshakably confident while dragging the corpse of your old self behind you. The world responds to power, not potential. And today, you stop negotiating with the timid identity that betrayed you for years. Now, before we break into the 7 laws of strategic fearlessness, understand one thing. This is not self-help. This is self-domination. This is the deliberate rewriting of your internal hierarchy where your weak instincts lose their throne and your strategic mind takes command. 1. Destroy the weak identity before it destroys you. Most people never realize they've been living as a character written by forces outside their control. They assume their personality is just who they are, when in reality, it's a patchwork of inherited fears, outdated beliefs, childhood conditioning, and the accumulated dust of their past failures. This default identity feels familiar, but familiarity is a trap. The mind clings to patterns it knows, even if those patterns are the very reason life keeps repeating itself. The weak identity is not a villain you consciously invited. It formed itself quietly over the years. A parent's criticism, a teacher's sarcasm, a friend's rejection, one embarrassing moment that burned into memory. These become the threads of how you see yourself. You didn't choose them, you inherited them. And because you never questioned them, they became your internal operating system. This is why you behave the same way, even when you want change. This is why you hesitate, even when you know what to do. This is why you shrink, even when ambition calls for expansion. You think your personality is the problem. It's not. The problem is the identity you protect without realizing it's sabotaging you. Weak identity operates like a corrupt advisor, whispering limitations into your ear. It shows up in the smallest habits, stopping when things get uncomfortable, needing reassurance, replaying mistakes, obsessing over what others think, doubting your capability, hesitating when courage is required. These behaviors aren't random. They all come from the same root. A self-image that was built for survival, not strength. The weak identity was designed to avoid pain, avoid uncertainty, avoid conflict. It shields you from discomfort, but at a cost. It shields you from power too. And because it feels normal, you rarely question it. You defend it as if you're defending your life, when in truth, you're defending your limitations. A weak identity wants one thing: to stay alive. It fears change because change threatens its existence. It will whisper logical excuses like, "This is not the right time, maybe later. What if you fail? What will people think?" These aren't thoughts. They're the identity fighting for survival. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If you don't consciously kill that identity, it will slowly kill your potential. Not literally, but through 1,000 small concessions. A missed opportunity. A conversation you stayed silent in. A goal you postponed. A dream you convinced yourself was unrealistic. Every time you obey the weak identity, you reinforce it. Every time you listen to that small voice of hesitation, you strengthen the bars of the psychological prison you live in. Most people spend their entire lives decorating that prison cell, improving their comfort, trying to feel better, reading motivational quotes instead of walking out of the door that was always open. Improving the weak identity is not the answer. You cannot polish something that was flawed at its foundation. You don't negotiate with weakness. You outgrow it. You overwrite it. Destruction of the weak identity means breaking the mental associations that keep you aligned with the old version of yourself. This involves awareness, choice, and action. Awareness, recognizing the patterns that belong to the old identity. Choice, refusing to act from those patterns. Action, doing what the weak identity fears, so it loses influence. This isn't emotional, it's mechanical. The identity you act from is the identity that becomes dominant. If you consistently choose the stronger pattern, the weaker one dissolves. Think of identity like muscle tissue. What you use expands. What you ignore atrophies. If you stop feeding the weak identity, stop obeying its fears, stop listening to its doubts, stop giving it control, it fades. Not overnight, but predictably. And here's the crucial part. Destroying the weak identity doesn't mean destroying you. It means destroying the unchosen version of you so that the deliberate, powerful version can take its place. You're not eliminating your essence, you're eliminating your conditioning. This process begins with brutal honesty. You must identify the traits, behaviors, and beliefs that belong to the version of you that has kept your life small. The version of you who avoids discomfort, avoids confrontation, avoids ambition. The version of you who tries to minimize risk instead of maximize capability. Once you see these patterns clearly, you strip them of authority by refusing to act from them. Not by fighting them, not by arguing with them, but by overriding them with decisive action. Weak identity cannot survive repeated contradiction. Every time you do something, it fears. Speak up, take initiative, commit to a decision, pursue growth, confront uncertainty, you weaken its hold. Eventually, the weak identity becomes incompatible with who you're becoming. It stops feeling comfortable because you've outgrown it. And what once felt natural now feels unacceptable. This is the moment the real transformation begins. When you are more loyal to the identity you are building than the identity you inherited. From a Machiavellian standpoint, identity is a political institution within your own mind. The weak identity is the old ruler. It wants stability, control, predictability. The new identity is the challenger, ambitious, bold, strategic. One of them will govern your choices. One will dictate your limits. One will define your future. You cannot serve both. You cannot rise while protecting the very identity that kept you low. You cannot step into a powerful life while carrying a powerless self-image. To destroy the weak identity is to revoke its authority over you. To build a stronger one is to claim authorship of your fate. You don't change by hoping. You change by replacing the mental blueprint you've been living under. You stop being the version of yourself the world shaped, and you start being the version of yourself you intentionally designed. And once that shift begins, confidence is no longer something you chase. It becomes a byproduct of the identity you now serve. 2. Fearlessness begins when you stop caring about approval. The weak identity survives on one fuel, the desire to be accepted. If you strip away that craving, its entire structure collapses. That's why this lesson is blunt. Approval seeking isn't a personality trait. It's a psychological leash. And until you cut it, you cannot rise beyond the version of yourself that bends, hesitates, and shrinks for the comfort of others. Most people don't realize how deeply approval governs them. They dress for it, speak for it, hesitate because of it, apologize unnecessarily to protect it, and even sabotage themselves just to avoid the slightest chance of rejection. Their whole existence revolves around staying likable, agreeable, uncontroversial, and harmless. And the truth is ugly. A person obsessed with being liked will never be respected. A person who fears disapproval cannot act with authority. Approval addiction makes you predictable, and predictability makes you easy to control. Machiavelli understood that anyone who depends on the opinions of others becomes a pawn in their emotional games. When your mood rises and falls based on someone else's reaction, you are not leading your life. You're negotiating your existence. The weak identity desperately clings to approval because it equates rejection with danger. In ancient psychological terms, being disliked felt like being cast out of the tribe, which meant losing safety. But today, people still operate with that outdated fear. They act as if disagreement is a threat, criticism is a wound, and someone's negative opinion is a verdict on their worth. Here's the hard truth. None of that is real. Approval is not survival. Disapproval is not death. Criticism is not truth. Yet the weak identity reacts as if each one is a catastrophe. That's why your confidence collapses whenever someone frowns, mocks you, ignores your effort, or disagrees with you. You're still measuring your life with the wrong ruler, the emotional ruler of someone who needs permission. Fearlessness begins the moment you stop tying your identity to other people's reactions. Not when you argue with them, not when you try to prove yourself, but when their approval or disapproval becomes irrelevant to your self-direction. This doesn't mean becoming rude or reckless. It means untethering your self-worth from the unstable opinions of others. People change their minds for emotional, irrational, biased, and selfish reasons. If your sense of self depends on that chaos, your confidence will always be fragile. Think about how many opportunities you've avoided because of approval seeking. You didn't speak your mind because you feared sounding wrong. You didn't take risks because you feared failing publicly. You didn't set boundaries because you feared seeming difficult. You didn't pursue ambition because you feared being judged for wanting more. Every fear was rooted in the same anxiety. What will they think of me? But here's the Machiavellian twist. They rarely think about you at all. People are consumed with their own worries, ego, insecurities, and narratives. Their judgments are scattered, inconsistent, and often illogical. Letting them define your identity is not humility, it's self-erasure. Approval-seeking also fractures your identity. You wear different masks depending on who you're with, adjusting yourself like a politician desperate for votes. You sacrifice authenticity for acceptance, power for likability, and conviction for compliance. But every time you do this, your sense of self gets weaker, not stronger. You train your mind to believe you're only safe when approved, and that belief becomes a psychological cage. To build fearlessness, you must reverse the dynamic entirely. Instead of asking, "Do they like me?" the strategic mind asks, "Does their approval matter to my goals?" Most of the time, it doesn't. Most people whose validation you chase cannot influence your destiny. Most opinions you're afraid of come from spectators, not builders. Most criticism you fear is from the same people who never risk anything themselves. Why let them dictate your identity? Fearlessness is not the absence of fear, it's the absence of dependence on approval. When your decisions come from strategy instead of social anxiety, you enter a new psychological territory, internal authority. You become guided by your own standards, not by the crowd's reactions. And here's where real confidence forms. When you no longer need approval, people instinctively respect you more. Independence is magnetic. Emotional self-sufficiency makes others mirror your certainty. The person who does not flinch, justify, or scramble for acceptance gains silent authority because people sense they cannot manipulate or sway him easily. The paradox is ruthless, but true. The less you seek approval, the more naturally it comes. The more you chase approval, the more people withhold it. People respect independence, but exploit neediness. They admire those who stand alone, but ignore those who beg for attention. So, how do you break the habit? You begin by acting from conviction, not reaction. You start saying what you truly mean. You allow people to misunderstand you without rushing to correct them. You allow disagreement without shrinking. You choose decisions that serve your long-term interest, not your momentary likability. Every time you practice this, the old approval-seeking identity loses power. It gets keyter. It becomes less persuasive. It stops being the dominant voice in your head. And as that dependency dissolves, something remarkable happens. Fear starts losing its leverage. Approval no longer determines your actions. Criticism no longer dictates your emotions. Disapproval no longer threatens your identity. You become internally governed, not socially controlled. You rise in confidence because confidence is nothing more than freedom from needing validation. You rise in authority because authority emerges from self-possession. You rise in fearlessness because fear cannot manipulate a person who isn't seeking safety in the crowd. When you stop caring about approval, you don't become careless, you become powerful. You finally understand that your identity is yours to shape, not theirs to approve. And once you reach that realization, the weak identity loses its strongest weapon against you: fear of judgment. 3. Make decisions with strategy, not emotion. If you want to understand why the weak identity controls you, look at how you make decisions. Most people don't choose their actions, they feel their way into them. They let their moods decide their discipline, their fears decide their risks, and their insecurities decide their future. This is why they stay average. Emotion is a volatile ruler. It changes direction whenever pressure shifts. Strategy, on the other hand, is stable, consistent, unmoved by temporary storms. The difference between those who rise and those who stay trapped in their old identity comes down to one principle. Weak minds react emotionally. Powerful minds respond strategically. Emotion-based decision-making feels natural because it demands nothing from you. It requires no thought, no discipline, no perspective, only impulse. It lets you retreat when things get difficult, hesitate when opportunities appear, and overthink when clarity is needed. When emotion is in charge, your life becomes chaotic. You move in circles, not forward. Strategy is the opposite. It's unemotional, unsentimental, and brutally efficient. Strategy doesn't ask how you feel, it asks what moves you closer to power, advantage, and the identity you are building. Machiavelli never advocated for cruelty without purpose. He advocated for clarity without self-delusion. Weakness comes from obeying emotional impulses that sabotage long-term outcomes. Strength comes from choosing actions that align with a bigger vision, even when they feel uncomfortable in the moment. Let's break it down. Emotions prioritize relief. Strategy prioritizes results. Emotion asks, what feels good right now? Strategy asks, what strengthens me later? Emotion seeks comfort. Strategy seeks control. When emotions lead, your decisions become reactive, defensive, and inconsistent. You stay stuck because you're constantly escaping discomfort instead of using it as fuel. And every time you obey that emotional impulse to avoid something hard, you reinforce the weak identity, the identity that believes pressure is dangerous, that fear is a stop sign, that discomfort is something to run from. A powerful identity is built through decisions that contradict how you feel. You might not feel ready. You act anyway. You might feel anxious. You move anyway. You might feel unmotivated. You execute anyway. That anyway is where identity shifts. Strategy thrives on disciplined action, not on emotional permission. Think of your emotions as weather, useful to observe, dangerous to obey. The sky can be stormy, but you still navigate the ship. If you waited for perfect emotions before acting, you would never leave the harbor. Confidence doesn't come from feeling brave before you act. It comes from acting when you don't. Emotions make terrible generals because they exaggerate threats. A simple challenge becomes catastrophe in your mind. A slight risk becomes humiliation. A potential opportunity becomes a potential disaster. The emotional brain always magnifies what could go wrong while ignoring what could go right. That imbalance keeps you small. Strategy exposes the lie. It reframes the situation into objective facts. What is the actual risk? What is the actual reward? What is under my control? What action strengthens my future position? Most fears collapse under this kind of inspection. Emotion makes you avoid. Strategy makes you analyze. Analysis creates clarity. Clarity destroys fear. This is why the confident and powerful seem calm under pressure, not because they lack emotion, but because they refuse to let emotion dictate their actions. Their identity is aligned with their goals, not their moods. The weak identity builds emotional habits like, I don't feel like it today. I'm too tired. What if I mess up? I'm not motivated yet. I'll wait for the right moment. But motivation is unreliable. Readiness is unreliable. These are illusions created by emotional resistance. If you obey them, you remain trapped in the same patterns for years. A strategic identity builds different internal patterns. I will act because it's required. My future self deserves this discipline. I do what strengthens me, not what comforts me. The moment I hesitate is the moment I must move. This is how people transform. Not through inspiration, through reprogramming their decision-making process. Here's what most people don't understand. Strategy is not cold. It's compassionate toward your long-term self. It protects you from the emotional sabotage of your current self. Your emotions are temporary. Your identity is long-term. Strategy defends the long-term by restraining the temporary. If you keep feeding your emotions with obedience, they grow stronger. If you starve them by choosing strategy, they grow quieter. Emotions are signals, not commands. They tell you how you feel, not what you must do. The moment you separate those two, your power multiplies. When you start making decisions strategically, your life becomes simpler. The noise drops. The internal conflict fades. Instead of wrestling with your emotions, you operate from clarity. Confidence grows because you trust yourself. You're no longer controlled by unpredictable mood swings. You become consistent, and consistency is the root of self-respect. A strategic mind also adapts faster. When a plan fails, emotion wants to quit. Strategy adjusts, recalibrates, and moves forward. Failure becomes data, not identity. And because strategy is oriented toward growth, every setback becomes useful. The weak identity collapses under pressure. The strategic identity evolves under it. Another Machiavellian truth. People trust and follow those who appear emotionally stable and decisive. When you make decisions from strategy, your presence changes. Your energy becomes more grounded. People sense reliability, confidence, and control. Emotional volatility makes people doubt you. Strategic consistency makes people respect you. Your goal is not to eliminate emotion that's impossible and unnecessary. Your goal is to stop letting emotion govern you. You let it speak, but you never let it command. The commander must always be strategy. Once your decisions consistently serve your long-term identity instead of your short-term feelings, the old self loses its influence. Hesitation weakens, fear dissolves, confidence rises. You become someone who acts with intention, not impulse. And that is the core of fearlessness. Freedom from emotional rule, loyalty to a strategic vision, authority over your own impulses. This is how the weak identity dies. Not through force, but through irrelevance. And this is how the powerful identity emerges. Through disciplined, strategic choice. Power doesn't come from who you think you are. It comes from who others perceive you to be. Most people never understand this simple truth. The world does not respond to your intentions, your dreams, or your inner potential. It responds to your reputation, the image you project, the standards you enforce, and the behavior you consistently demonstrate. A weak identity waits to be recognized. A strong identity constructs a reputation so clear, so consistent, and so deliberate that people adjust themselves automatically when they interact with you. Reputation is not an accident. It's not something you leave in the hands of others. It's a tool, a weapon, a silent force that influences how people treat you long before you open your mouth. Machiavelli understood that a ruler's power did not depend on his private virtues, but on the image he cultivated in public. Your reputation is the psychological armor you carry into every room. If it's weak, people handle you carelessly. If it's strong, people become cautious, respectful, and measured around you. Most people sabotage themselves because they hope respect will arise naturally. They wait for others to notice their worth, or they try to gain respect through being agreeable, polite, or endlessly patient. But respect doesn't come from softness. Respect comes from clarity of boundaries and consistency of behavior that signals you are not someone who tolerates disrespect, manipulation, or emotional games. A strong reputation begins with understanding this. You teach people how to treat you. You teach them through what you allow, what you reject, and what you walk away from. If you allow people to overstep you, they will. If you stay silent when someone disrespects you, they will repeat it. If you accept crumbs, you signal you don't deserve more. People are not mind readers. They respond to your behavior, not your expectations. They learn who you are from your patterns, not your words. So let's define the foundations of a powerful, fear-inducing reputation. First, consistency. People trust what they can predict. If you're confident, only when you feel good. Assertive, only when you're motivated. Disciplined, only when you're inspired. Your presence becomes unreliable. You become easy to read and easy to dismiss. A strong reputation is built on predictability. Others should know without guessing that you stand firm, you don't entertain nonsense, and you don't break your standards because someone pressures you emotionally. Consistency creates credibility. Credibility creates respect. Respect creates influence. Second, boundaries. Weak identities dissolve at the slightest push. Strong identities remain intact. People respect the individual whose no actually means no, whose standards don't evaporate under guilt or persuasion, and who does not explain or justify himself endlessly. Boundaries are not walls, they're signals. They tell the world, this is how you will treat me. This is how you will not treat me. And if you cross the line, you lose access. Nothing commands respect more than a person willing to remove themselves from situations that compromise their standards. Most people cling to relationships, opportunities, or social circles where they are undervalued. They think staying makes them loyal. In reality, it makes them predictable. It shows they will endure anything for approval. And once people sense that, their respect evaporates. Third, strategic silence. Weak identities talk too much because they feel the need to explain themselves. They overshare, over-apologize, and over-justify. They think clarity comes from more words when, in truth, power comes from fewer. Stratégique silence crée mystique. Mystique creates curiosity. Curiosity creates psychological weight. The less people know about your fears, your weaknesses, your insecurities, or your personal struggles, the less ammunition they have. Silence protects your power. It also forces others to fill the gaps with their own interpretations, which often work in your favor. Fourth, controlled expression. People respect those who control their reactions. If you explode easily, you are emotionally exposed. If you sulk, complain, or broadcast your frustration, you lose leverage. A stable presence signals inner authority. When others cannot provoke you, manipulate you, or predict your reactions, you become harder to influence, and that makes you someone to respect. Fifth, reliability. Power increases when others know you keep your word, not because you are nice, but because reliability is rare. The person who follows through, finishes what they start, and behaves according to their principles becomes someone others take seriously. It communicates internal structure, and internal structure commands external respect. Finally, a reputation grows from the identity you embody, not the identity you talk about. If you want people to see you as disciplined, act disciplined. If you want people to treat you as confident, act confident. If you want people to respect your time, respect it yourself. Reputation is the external reflection of internal behavior, repeated enough times to become undeniable. Here's the turning point. A strong reputation reinforces itself. Once people perceive you as someone who cannot be played with, they naturally adjust their tone, their choices, and their approach around you. They become more polite, more cautious, more respectful, not because you demanded it, but because the reputation you built silently influences their psychology. This is how fearlessness emerges. When your external world stops challenging your inner strength because your reputation has already established the terms. Confidence becomes easier when others treat you with respect. Respect becomes natural when your reputation commands it. Your reputation becomes powerful when you behave in alignment with your chosen identity, not the weak one you abandon. A weak identity hopes for respect. A strong identity engineers it. And once you engineer a reputation that signals power, the old version of you, timid, scattered, inconsistent, can never return. 5. Train discomfort until it obeys you. If there is one truth the weak identity cannot survive, it is this. Discomfort is the arena where all strength is built. But most people, whether they admit it or not, are loyal servants to their comfort. They negotiate with it. They obey it. They let it dictate how they think, act, and decide. And then they wonder why their confidence evaporates the moment life demands something from them. The weak identity isn't weak because of fate. It's weak because it has never been tested. It has never endured sustained pressure. It has never been forced to grow beyond what was easy. It collapses under stress because it was built in the absence of stress. And that is why discomfort becomes the battlefield where the old identity dies and the new one takes shape. Training discomfort does not mean harming yourself. It means deliberately choosing actions that stretch your limits, challenge your patterns, and force adaptation. It means confronting the very situations your old identity avoided, not to punish yourself, but to evolve yourself. Strength is not created through suffering. Strength is created through exposure and adaptation. You face what intimidates you until it loses authority over you. Most people don't understand how deep their avoidance runs. They avoid difficult conversations, demanding tasks, new opportunities, uncertainty, skill development, and anything that threatens their sense of safety. They carry dreams that require courage, but live habits that require comfort. They want transformation without tension, but growth is not built on ease, it's built on resistance. Every creature strengthens through resistance. A muscle grows when it resists weight. A mind grows when it resists complacency. An identity grows when it resists fear. Discomfort is not the enemy. Discomfort is the teacher. And when you stop running from it, you stop running from your potential. Let's be blunt. The weak identity has trained itself to escape pressure. Whenever something feels challenging, it withdraws. Whenever something feels unfamiliar, it hesitates. Whenever something feels risky, it invents excuses. This pattern protects comfort but destroys confidence. Because confidence does not come from avoiding difficulty, it comes from proving to yourself that you can handle difficulty. Every time you step into discomfort with intention, you send your mind a new message. I am someone who can handle pressure. I am someone who does hard things. I am someone who moves toward growth, not away from it. These messages accumulate and eventually form a new identity, one rooted in capability instead of fear. But here's the strategically important part. Discomfort must be trained, not randomly encountered. You don't wait for difficult moments to appear. You create them. You structure them. You choose them. You control the exposure so your mind adjusts gradually, systematically, efficiently. People misunderstand the nature of toughness. Toughness isn't gritting your teeth through chaos. Toughness is conditioning, like exposure therapy for your limitations. You deliberately step into mild discomfort today so you can handle heavier discomfort tomorrow. You increase your threshold the same way an athlete increases resistance, with consistency, not recklessness. When you train discomfort, you take the shock out of challenge. Pressure no longer feels threatening. It feels familiar. Uncertainty no longer feels paralyzing. It feels navigable. Effort no longer feels unbearable. It feels normal. And this normalization of discomfort is where the identity shift becomes irreversible. The weak identity relies on comfort because comfort is predictable. The strong identity relies on discomfort because discomfort builds capability. Look at anyone who commands respect: a leader, a competitor, a builder, a strategist. Their confidence isn't an accident. It's a side effect of repeatedly doing what others avoid. They stepped into difficult scenarios so often that difficulty stopped intimidating them. Their emotional system adapted. Their habits adapted. Their identity adapted. That is what you are training. Adaptation. Not pain, not struggle for its own sake. Adaptation. You aren't trying to prove how much you can endure. You're proving how much you can grow. And growth demands friction. Not suffering friction. Not self-punishment challenge. Not self-destruction, self-construction. Here's the Machiavellian insight. A person who is fully comfortable becomes predictable, easily intimidated, and easily manipulated. A person who is trained in discomfort becomes independent. They cannot be threatened by difficulty because difficulty is their environment. They cannot be pushed around by fear because they've rehearsed acting in its presence. They cannot be controlled by uncertainty because they've built tolerance for it. This is why training discomfort produces fearlessness. Fearlessness is not the absence of fear, it's the absence of intimidation. When discomfort stops scaring you, confidence becomes your default state. Not because you feel invincible, but because you feel capable. How do you train discomfort in a practical, strategic way? You identify the specific actions your old identity avoids, and you confront them consistently. Not all at once, not recklessly, not in extremes, but deliberately, repeatedly, intentionally. If you avoid difficult conversations, you start having them. If you avoid new challenges, you start taking them. If you avoid initiative, you start initiating. If you avoid discipline, you start practicing consistency. If you avoid pressure, you start stepping into controlled pressure. Each action is a vote for the new identity. Each moment of discomfort is a training session. Each decision you make despite resistance is a crack in the armor of the weak identity. And day by day, that old identity loses relevance. It stops being your reference point. It stops being your default. It stops being your limit. Discomfort obeys you because you have taught it to. Fear obeys you because you have exposed yourself to it gradually. Weakness weakens because you have stopped feeding it. The ultimate goal is simple. Become someone who does not flinch at difficulty. Someone who remains stable under pressure. Someone who has conditioned themselves to act even when the old self would have retreated. When you train discomfort until it obeys you, you become someone who can handle life without collapsing into excuses. And once you reach that point, confidence isn't something you try to build, it becomes the natural result of who you are. 6. Rewrite your internal narrative with precision. Identity is not built from your circumstances. It is built from the story you repeat about your circumstances. Most people have no idea how much power they hand over to their past simply through the narratives they rehearse daily. They believe they have a fixed personality, a natural limit, or an unchangeable nature. Not because it's true, but because they have repeated those lines so often that the mind accepts them as fact. The weak identity survives exactly because of this. It has a story, and you keep telling it. A story of limitation, a story of fear, a story of doubt, a story of who you used to be, projected into who you think you must remain. If you want to rise, if you want confidence to become your baseline, if you want to step into a strategically powerful self, your first battle is not with the world, it's with your narrative. Because your narrative is the architecture of your identity. The mind does not operate based on truth. It operates based on repetition. If you repeat a weak story, you become a weak character. If you repeat a powerful story, you become a powerful character. This is why the weak identity feels so real, not because it is accurate, but because it is familiar. You have repeated its lines for years. You've kept its script alive. You've handed it the pen again and again. But here's the truth. Your identity is not a biography. It is a screenplay. And screenplays can be rewritten. Most people misunderstand self-belief. They think it's about saying positive things. They think it's about hyping themselves up. They think confidence comes from compliments and mantras. That's nonsense. Confidence comes from alignment when your internal narrative matches the identity you want to embody. If your story contradicts your goals, your actions will always sabotage themselves. Narrative creates identity. Identity creates behavior. Behavior creates outcomes. Outcomes reinforce a narrative. This loop either imprisons you or elevates you. Weak identities run on outdated scripts. Strong identities run on deliberate ones. To rewrite your internal narrative, you must first understand how the old one was created. It didn't come from one moment. It came from a chain of interpretations. A small failure interpreted as evidence of incompetence. A childhood criticism interpreted as truth. A moment of embarrassment interpreted as a permanent flaw. A rejection interpreted as proof of unworthiness. These interpretations accumulated over years until they became your implicit I am statements. I am shy. I am insecure. I am not confident. I am not capable. I am bad under pressure. I am not meant for more. Not one of these statements is an objective fact. They are judgments often formed at times when you lacked the maturity, understanding, or perspective to interpret events accurately. Yet you carry them as if they were carved into stone. This is where Machiavellian strategy enters. You must divorce your identity from your history. Your past experiences do not define you. Your interpretation of them does. And interpretation is a choice. A strategic choice. Anyone who wants power over their life must master narrative reframing. This does not mean lying to yourself. It means interpreting events in a way that strengthens you, not weakens you. You extract lessons instead of labels. You extract information instead of identity. A setback is not who you are. It is feedback. A mistake is not your nature. It is data. A failure is not a prophecy. It is a moment. The weak identity clings to the story of, "This is just who I am." The strong identity asks, "Who must I become to achieve what I want?" And then it writes the story accordingly. Rewriting your narrative requires precision. You don't replace old lines with vague positivity. You replace them with intentional identity statements tied to your behavior and goals. The new narrative must reflect the person you are constructing, not the person you fear you are. I am someone who grows under pressure. I am someone who acts even when uncertain. I am someone who learns quickly. I am someone who adapts. I am someone who follows through. I am someone who keeps improving. These statements do more than sound good. They align your perception with your actions. They create internal cohesion. Your mind needs clarity. When you give it a story that strengthens your emerging identity, it begins reshaping your behavior to match that story. The weak identity is reactive. It narrates itself through emotion. The strong identity is intentional. It narrates itself through strategy. Look at the most powerful, confident people you know. They don't tell stories about their flaws. They don't rehearse narratives about their limitations. They don't repeat scripts about their insecurities. Not because they have none, but because they refuse to give their weaknesses a narrative home. They starve the old story until it becomes irrelevant. You cannot build a new identity on top of an old narrative. You must strip the old narrative of its authority by recognizing it for what it is. A story that no longer serves your evolution. Once you start rewriting your internal narrative, something subtle but profound happens. You stop identifying with your old patterns. You stop seeing yourself through the lens of your past. You start seeing yourself through the lens of your potential. And when your self-perception shifts, your decisions shift, your confidence shifts, your behavior shifts. Identity is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Rewrite the prophecy, and you rewrite the outcome. This is how the weak identity loses power. Not through force, but through irrelevance. When you stop telling its story, it stops existing. And this is how fearlessness emerges. When the story you tell yourself is no longer a story of limitation, but a story of construction, growth, and strategic self-direction, rewrite your narrative with precision, and the person you were becomes a footnote. Rewrite it with consistency, and the person you become becomes inevitable. 7. Act before you feel ready. If there is one habit that keeps the weak identity alive longer than anything else, it is waiting. Waiting for motivation, waiting for clarity, waiting for confidence, waiting for the right moment, the right emotion, the right version of yourself to appear. But that version never appears on its own. Confidence does not come before action. Certainty does not come before movement. Readiness does not come before experience. The weak identity convinces you that hesitation is wisdom. It whispers that you should hold back, think more, prepare more, analyze more. It disguises fear as caution. It disguises insecurity as logic. And because these inner arguments feel responsible and reasonable, most people fall for them. They don't see the trap. Hesitation becomes identity. Indecision becomes habit. Delay becomes personality. This is how the weak identity survives. Not through power, not through strength, but through endless postponement. It never needs to fight you directly. It only needs to convince you to wait. Acting before you're ready is the antidote. It is the single most powerful way to break identity paralysis, because it removes the weak identity's favorite terrain, indecision. When you act before you feel ready, you shift the power dynamic inside yourself. You tell your mind, "My actions are not ruled by my comfort." You dismantle the illusion that you must feel confident before you behave confidently. You show your nervous system that fear is not a command, it is just a sensation. And once your brain realizes that hesitation no longer controls you, the old identity begins to crumble. Most people misunderstand readiness entirely. They think readiness is an emotional state, calm, confident, certain. In reality, readiness is a skill, something forged through experience, not something you possess beforehand. Look at any field. A leader doesn't become decisive by thinking, he becomes decisive by deciding. A fighter doesn't become capable before stepping into the ring, he becomes capable inside the ring. A speaker doesn't become confident before speaking. Confidence appears only after repeated exposure. Action is the generator of readiness, not the reward for it. This is the strategic truth. You do not wait until you are the stronger identity before you act like it. You act like it so you can become it. The weak identity hates this idea because it thrives on emotional dependency. It wants you to wait until you feel safe, calm, certain. It wants the perfect plan, the perfect conditions. It wants guarantees. But guarantees don't build strength. Uncertainty does. Discomfort does. Action does. Acting before you're ready is an identity weapon. It forces your brain to update its self-image. When you repeatedly take actions the old identity would have avoided, your mind has no choice but to conclude, "I must be someone new because I am behaving like someone new." Identity always follows action, not the other way around. Think about how often you've been held back by the illusion of readiness. You didn't apply because you weren't qualified enough. You didn't speak up because you weren't confident enough. You didn't start the project because you weren't prepared enough. You didn't commit because you weren't experienced enough. Every hesitation reinforced the same identity. "I am not ready." And every time you said those words, your mind believed you a little more. Not because it was true, but because you repeated it. Acting before you feel ready interrupts that cycle violently and effectively. It destroys the old story and replaces it with lived evidence. You acted anyway. You moved anyway. You showed up anyway, and the mind cannot argue with evidence. This is the Machiavellian advantage of decisive action. The world responds to what you do, not what you intended. People take you seriously when you move, when you initiate, when you execute. The person who hesitates loses respect because hesitation communicates doubt. But the person who acts, even imperfectly, communicates direction, will, and presence. People follow movement. They trust momentum. They respect initiative. When you act before you're ready, you tap into the psychology of dominance. Not dominance over others, but dominance over your weaker impulses. This is the foundation of confidence, not positive thinking, but internal leadership. Confidence is not an emotion. It is the cumulative effect of action that contradicts fear. Every time you choose movement over hesitation, you teach your brain the following truth: I can rely on myself. And self-reliance produces a deeper confidence than any external praise ever could. There's another strategic benefit. Action exposes reality. Most fear is built on uncertainty, exaggerations, worst-case scenarios, imagined outcomes. When you act, you replace imagination with actual feedback. And reality is almost always less frightening than the mind's projections. Clarity comes from movement. Strength comes from exposure. Skill comes from repetition. Identity comes from consistency. The weak identity cannot survive inside this process because it has no room to justify itself. It has no safe corner to hide in. Actions that defy fear leave no foundation for the old self to stand on. Eventually, you reach a psychological tipping point. You are no longer a person who waits. You are a person who moves. You are no longer a person who doubts. You are a person who decides. You are no longer a person who hesitates. You are a person who acts. And once you embody this identity, the world interacts with you differently. People trust you more. Opportunities appear more often. Respect increases. Your sense of power becomes steady, grounded, and self-generated. Act before you're ready. Not because it feels good, it won't, but because it is the only way to evolve past the weak identity that has kept you small. When your actions outpace your fears, the fears lose influence. When your steps outpace your doubts, the doubts lose credibility. When your identity begins matching the person you behave like, the old identity becomes irrelevant. Readiness was never the requirement. Readiness was always the result of movement. When you understand this, hesitation becomes unnecessary and confidence becomes inevitable. Everything you've learned leads to one unavoidable truth. The weak identity was never your enemy, it was your creation. You built it through hesitation, through avoidance, through the stories you repeated, through the comfort you worshipped, through the approval you chased, through the emotions you allowed to command you. It stayed alive because you kept feeding it. But now you see the architecture of your own mind clearly. You see where the fractures were. You see how your old identity operated. You see why you stayed small for so long. And most importantly, you see the path forward, a path built not on hope or motivation, but on deliberate psychological reconstruction. Destroying the old identity was never about aggression. It was about liberation. It was about reclaiming authorship over your narrative, your choices, your reactions, and your future. You replaced emotional impulses with strategy. You replaced approval seeking with autonomy. You replaced avoidance with exposure. You replaced hesitation with movement. You replaced inherited stories with intentional identity. That is not self-help. That is self-governance. The highest form of power is sovereignty over your inner world. If you apply these lessons consistently, something irreversible happens. The old you becomes incompatible with the life you are building. Your habits no longer match his. Your decisions no longer match his. Your posture, your presence, your tone, your reputation, none of it aligns with the person you once were. You are no longer shaped by your past. You are shaped by your construction. Identity stops being an accident and becomes a design. This is why fearlessness becomes natural to you, not because life gets easier, but because you get harder to intimidate. You've trained discomfort until it obeys you, rewritten your narrative until it empowers you, and acted so decisively that hesitation no longer recognizes you. The world respects the person who respects himself. The world follows the person who leads himself. The world fears the person who cannot be destabilized by emotion, rejection, or uncertainty. And that is who you are becoming, not by dreaming, but by doing. Not by wishing, but by constructing. Not by hoping, but by replacing the weak identity piece by piece with a stronger one that you chose deliberately. From this point forward, the old identity has no authority over you. It may whisper, but you no longer obey. It may resist, but you no longer negotiate. Its script is outdated, and you no longer play its character. You have stepped into strategic fearlessness, the only form of confidence that lasts, because it was built, not borrowed. Your life from here will not rise because you got lucky. It will rise because you outgrew the self who kept you small. The weak identity was your past. The strong identity is your future. And now finally, you're acting like the author of both.